This is my part two of my profiling. Now, this profile is of a spiritual pimp. Yes, I said it, a spiritual pimp. Now, let me tell you the nature of a spiritual pimp. I touched on some things earlier, and this is what I want to read to you before I get started, because we need to understand clearly that we fight not against flesh and blood. So I'm not talking about a person, I'm talking about wicked spirits. I'm not talking about people. This is Ephesians 6, starting with 10. Finally, be strengthened. I'm reading from Holman, the Holman Bible. Finally, be strengthened by the Lord and by his vast strength. Put on the full armor of God so that you can stand against the tactics of the devil. For our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the world powers of this darkness, against spiritual forces of evil in the heavens. This is why you must take up the full armor of God so that you may be able to resist in the evil day, and having prepared everything to take your stand. Stand, therefore. That was Holman, and this is on Christian warfare. This whole walk is inundated with spiritual warfare. In the series, Get Your Mind Right, the purpose of that series is to get us to the point that we're walking on purpose. We're walking in purpose, in functioning in the position that God created us to function in. And my goal and Get Your Mind Right is to prepare you to the point whereas you can engage, because you're going to have to fight or war to get to your place of assignment. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be without warfare. But if you submit yourself unto God and walk in righteousness, you're going to win. I heard somebody say that the fight's been fixed, but you still got to go through the motions. So I said something I taped earlier today, and I mentioned the Garden of Eden and the Nanachis, the serpent, and how he gets in your ear. And I liken him to how a pimp gets in the ear and gets his subjects. Well, the same goal or the same objective that we have in establishing the kingdom of God, those that are the wicked ones run parallel. God told us to be fruitful, multiply, replenish, subdue, and have dominion. And he mentioned the birds of the air, the cattle of the field, everything creeping and crawling, and the fish in the sea. Now that is naturally and spiritual as well. Well, the enemy method is the same. He wants to be fruitful and multiply and replenish and subdue and have dominion over people, over God's anointed ones. And the same method is used, and unfortunately it works. And people are still getting turned out by the same method. It doesn't have to change because it still works. Now, this is the order in which people or unclean spirits working through people have dominion over you. First, they manipulate. They manipulate your words, their words, God's words. Excuse me. After it gets to a point where they cannot manipulate, then here comes the intimidation, where they strong arm you physically or strong arm you mentally, or dangle something in front of you and then take it back. Whatever the hook is, and it's going to be a hook. So, James said that we are enticed by our own lust. So, after the manipulation comes the intimidation. And if you allow yourself to be intimidated, you are going to be dominated. So, don't allow that. This is done by misinformation, misdirection, and distraction. Now, and God does have a plan for your life, if you get distraction, going into the wrong career, choosing the wrong mate, whether you marry him or you just mate and have babies by, whatever it is that distracts us and get us off track from God's appointed path from us, is how it keeps Christians weakened and the body or the enemy strong. So if we learn not to be distracted, misdirected, or take in misinformation, question everything. If God tells us that we can question him, then you should question everything. And I don't mean question as in an argument. Stay away from vain disputings. Folks going to believe what they're going to believe anyway. I strongly recommend you do your research. I look up everything. I research everything. I sure do. I'm not going to, if I'm told something, I'm not going to say, I don't believe that ain't true. You don't know what's true or not. If you hadn't looked it up, you're going to have to start reading. You're going to have to start reading. You're going to have to ask for discernment. So, the series Getting Your Mind Right is getting us to the point that we're strong. We're strong in our minds. And we're able to understand when we're being manipulated. So that is the profile of a spiritual pimp. Put out the hook, bait it, see who's going to take the bait, what can they get away with, how far can they manipulate you. Are you going to stand for intimidation? Are you going to allow somebody to dominate you? Start looking and evaluating situations spiritually. Because you might be looking at anything naturally, but look at the spiritual implications behind it. Don't be trapped. Don't be ensnared. So that is the spiritual profile of a pimp. He looks like the enemy. Same thing that, let me tell you a little story. There were many trees in the Garden of Eden. Now, that word tree doesn't necessarily represent wood. All through the scriptures, back in the New Testament, the blind man came to Jesus, and I don't know if this is the occasion where he's put spittle on his eyes or mud on his eyes. But at one point, he asked the man, "What can you see?" He said, "I see men as trees." Now, that was a prophetic clue. Remember, we're at war. When the disciples talked to Jesus alone, they would go back and ask him, "Rabbi, why do you preach in parables?" He said, "Because it's for the kingdom of God to understand and not the others." Well, you got to keep in mind at all times this is war. So if something happens, evaluate that situation and look into it and see what it really is and see it for what it really is. So going back to the seeing man as trees, he said you would be like a mighty oak and that you would be like a tree by the river waters. That's in Psalms. So throughout the Old Testament and New Testament, beings are referred to as trees. Now, there was one command given in the garden, and that command was to eat from the tree of life. That was representation of the Torah. That was the representation of Jesus. He didn't just come up on the scene when Mary gave birth to him. He'd been on the scene from the very beginning of creation. So that means to commune and to sup with God. That was the only command that was given. Now the tree of good and evil is exactly what it is, the being of good and evil. Lucifer was once good. And after the rebellion, after he wanted to take dominion over God, over the heavens, and got evicted. So that is the duality of good and evil. But my point is, he got in that girl's ear. She was brand new. She didn't know what's happening. She said, "It looked good to me. It looked like it was good to eat. So I ate it." And without understanding that she was brand new, it would seem a little arrogant that she would speak to Jehovah in such a manner. But she was brand new. She was a baby. So we got to grow up. We got to grow up fast. We got to understand the devices of the enemy and learn to put our whole armor on. We're in some exciting times. We're in some perilous times. If the country is not flooding, it's on fire on one end, flooding on the other end. We could wake up at any morning and bread be $5.50 and gas $2.69 a gallon. Are you going to have enough faith to sustain you? I'm going to say yes. We're going to grow and we're going to learn together. So stick with me. I'm going to keep studying. I'm going to keep moving. And peace and blessings.